Okay, welcome everyone. This is the information session for our upcoming residential course to Bolivia. And we have Dan Robison here, who is the professor and will be leading the course. I guess so. He's going to go over the itinerary, go over the program, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. I am recording this so that anyone who is unable to attend will be able to watch the same webinar, and I'll hand it over to you, Dan.
Okay, well, hello everybody. Um, what I'm going to do is I don't know, I'm not going to formally give you a program. I'm going to run through what the program will look, and then I imagine there'll be a lot of questions which either I can answer or Chris can answer. So let me give you the input upon which you can ask your question. Okay, the course that we're proposing for this summer uh, meets the Amazon. Um, and it would be we currently have and the 4th and the 14th of July. And we'd be exploring some global themes of climate change, climate adaptation, a broad theme of biodiversity versus poverty, the fact that a lot of the biodiversity hotspots in the world are superimposed with areas of economic poverty. Um, People are generally aware of the problems with fires, deforestation in the Amazon, but maybe some people are not aware that the last year, 2023, was the worst year in history for burning in this particular part of Amazon. So even though it's greening up, there's still scars of what were the worst burns. Okay. And the fact that we've had the worst burns in history, when in some ways we knew what we should do 30 years ago, is what this course is about. How come when we know what should be done, things are getting worse? Um, and so we'll be visiting some of these both areas where things seem to be getting worse beyond our control, and other areas, where, as you'll see, I'll be talking about second solutions. Um, on our way, as you'll see in the pictures, we're going to visit the most biodiverse national park in the world, Madidi. Bolivia, highest deforestation rates in the world. On one hand, that means we still got a lot of forests, but it means that we're going through those forests both at an absolute rate and a per capita rate that is right up there, first and second in the world. Spend several days at what I call a third generation center. This has been looking at not just wringing hands about forests in other words, but thinking, what do we need to do? What's the technology that we need to have on the ground available to farmers? Farmers are the ones who decide whether they burn or not, whether they decide to cut a tree or not. And so this center is devoted to and getting that technology out there. Um, and indigenous leaders, because these are areas that the Amazon has always been populated. There are people that have been there. Their voice is not always heard. Um, and um, so we're going to be looking at it from their point of view. Asking some of the subjects that we'll be dealing with before we go on, that Future Generations University had for its first 10 years, 5 classes, had a residential every semester in a different country. And over those first 5 courses, the third residential always in Peru. So uh, the classes that I started teaching with Future Generations, which have to do with food security, agriculture, later on conservation. Um, where Peru was one of the places we saw it. In Bolivia, we actually have some chances to show you slightly, I don't want to say better, but in a shorter distance, we can look at a number of different things. It's not advancing for me. There we go. We'll arrive in La Paz, and there are two large problems with this. Um, the airport is at 4,000 meters above sea level, 15,500 feet. That's right up there with the highest peaks in the continental United States. Um, and this means that the bigger planes can only land when it's colder, when the air is thicker. So the international flights are arriving 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. Um, and then many people have, like I was born at this altitude. I still have, as I'm getting old. The solution to that is that we plan to give them a chance to use the bathroom, have a couple. We're going to transport you to a lower elevation. Um, let me, it says my video. Um, through this is a glacial valley that, and within my lifetime had glaciers yet on the side of it. It no longer does. We'll be passing through this. And something I have suggested to people is that where we're going is a town called Coroico, where I'll be showing you. There are different ways to get there. One would be taking the minibus from the airport to Coroico, or what I have down here and is for those of you that are in really good shape. This is what Hispanic. This is a paved Hispanic trail where you go up over the Andes and hike for 2 days and get down to the elevation where we'll be at later. So we'll look into the possibility of of offering some alternative arrival routes depending on what your level of fitness. There's another one I didn't provide a picture of, but it's called gravity assisted bicycling, where you get on a bicycle just behind this picture up in the right hand, and you go downhill for 40 kilometers, 25 miles from 4,500 meters to 1,000 meters above sea level on your bicycle. Run through this scenery down into montane forest, down into lower rainforest. Is for us to arrive and get together for a couple of days in Coroico. This is a town in the coffee zone. It's only 2 hours from La Paz. Um, this will allow us. I'm hoping to be. And spend a couple of days, get accustomed to the new surroundings. It also has some interesting field visits. This is a national park across. I did the coordinated management plan for 20 years ago or so. Opportunities to visit fields. There is an area of Afro-Bolivia. People arrived 400 years ago as slaves and maintained part of their African culture, but also took on Bolivian culture. This is just a 40, and just beyond them is a farm where a little known fact about Bolivia is that just before the World War II, Bolivia was the only country that was accepting Jewish refugees. So Bolivia accepted refugees for the duration of the war, and a number of them went and farmed um, in this area. And there's a small museum there um, uh, that commemorates this fact. So these are options depending on how much time we have and what the interest of the students will be. From Coroico, we'll take a bus, about a 4-hour bus ride. Santa Ana is in Alto Ben, a lot of chocolate. cacao. But as with other parts of tropical Bolivia, they've had a historical problem with burn or so for more than 20 years now. They have been developing tree alternatives, some agroforestry principles that do not include burning. An amount of success in Bolivia, but oddly enough, as they've scaled up, it has had more success in Africa, in Ghana and Ivory Coast, and it's had particularly a lot of success in Africa with women. So I think that why this would be, what it tells us about scaling up, technology is adopted by whom. I think these are all the subjects that would interest, that would be of broader interest in our master's program. To take a 1-day river trip. Initially, we'll be in a goal left, but after a couple of hours, National Park here on the right, which is the most biodiverse national park in the world. The reason it has such incredibly high reach is that it goes from this elevation, which is maybe 200 meters, 600 feet above sea level, to 6,000 meters above sea level. We won't see all of that, obviously. We'll be going through one part of it. It is because it protects a whole continuum from tropical rainforest to permanent glaciers in the Andes. Is Rujunavaque, where I live, and it's both it's a tourist uh, and for some very diverse savannas. Um, it'll allow us to look at the subject of burning, um, alternatives to burning. There we have examples of carbon credit forestry, people that have planted trees, and they're getting paid to plant these trees by people in Belgium as part of their national strategy for carbonizing their. This is a controversial in Bolivia, controversial worldwide. Examples on the ground. Obviously, ecotourism, the pros and cons of ecotourism. We have a chance to look at cattle ranching in the Amazon, mechanized agriculture in the Amazon, which I have a picture on a little bit. This is also where three large indigenous groups are based. Right is Madidi National Park, and to the left is a very large. We can talk with indigenous people as we come down the river. Our river trip will take us down through this area here, and we'll arrive at the town from the right. Left is downstream. We're going to take a river trip down and arrive here through the national park and indigenous territory. It also, there's an example for us to see some of the largest trees in the Amazon. I am sorry to say that even this forest burned on the ground, so we'll see these trees that we're hoping have survived and also burned. Ideally, we'll go to an area where we can see some agriculture by Mennonites. This is a religion originally out of Switzerland that has gotten to Bolivia through Russia, the United States, Canada, Mexico, Paraguay, and they're now doing row cropping agriculture in the Amazon near Jurunavac. This is controversial. It's a good basis for discussion. Pictures above are the Sariri Eco Lodge, which is an indigenous owned and run by a group of indigenous women. Those of you that have had my classes, this is Juta Lipas, who I had speak in our course, and sustainable livelihoods. This is She's the idea woman behind this launch, which is in a beautiful going into Bolivian National Park. So day 12 to La Paz. I think that we will try more than a meeting or so in La Paz, but people will be um, able to stay on. We can offer the alternative visiting Lake Titicaca from there, but some people might be short of time. They might not be comfortable in the altitude. You can at least get around the city, and this there's a network of I can't remember what they're called in English, but the ski lifts. We have public transportation, um, the ski lift, teleféricos around city. Do or go around the city and view it from above. Here back in Rujnabake. So I would say questions now. Questions maybe Kelly can answer or that I can answer. Is being offered as a two credit course or a 3 credit course, obviously at the graduate level. Yes, Chive, go ahead. Good to see you again, Chive. You're first.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, evening, everybody. Morning, I don't know the zones where you are. This is Shive, class of 2013. We did community change and peace building. Quite interesting presentation. Thank you, John, for that. Taking us through those good, beautiful slides, and then have a picture of Bolivia. I always wanted to visit Bolivia. But I have a question, not necessarily related to the conduct of the class or the residential, but my current program can be tricky. So I wanted to ask, is it possible just to join for a few days as a schedule might permit me when I'm free? Because we usually plan 3 months ahead, so I'll be sure when I'll be free during July, in the middle of April or beginning of May there. So is it possible for me to join just for a few days according to my schedule and so on? I don't really mind having it attended, not having it as a credit, but just for the experience. Thank you. I so submit.
Okay, Chive. Well, let me answer initially that, which is to say that since you live in Namibia, and we had our accident in Namibia, and Namibia is about as far away from Bolivia as you can get. You have to go to South Africa first, and the most direct flights would be through Brazil. So it's going to take you a day and a half to get here, a day and a half to go back. So I would say if you're not taking it for credit, there's obviously permission has to come from above. Since you are a graduated student, I would think that you would be allowed to join for several days. But given the distance you would come, I would encourage you to come for the whole time.
Okay, thank you, John. Well noted. I was.
Okay, before we go to Kimberly, Chris or Kelly, did you want to speak on the nuts and bolts? I'm sorry if I jumped into the
that's why
questions and answers.
That's why I threw up this slide. Sort of the nuts and bolts of the course. And this is in fact a course. And so coursework will be required to earn credit. And maybe this answers the earlier questions. All participants must take the course for credit. But we can maybe talk offline for Chive. So there's 2 credits for doing the online work and active participation in the Zoom sessions, which we'll have beforehand and in Bolivia. And then they'll have a 3rd credit, which will be a community lab at the end of the course. The cost is the same as a 2 or 3 credit cost, or a 2 or 3 credit course. So the cost of so it's $1,800 or $2,400 minus whatever scholarship you might be receiving. And then travel costs, including flights, visas, that sort of thing, those are not included. So you would have to pay for that on your own. But then once you get to Bolivia, your accommodations, transportation, most meals, those are all included. Accommodations will be in shared rooms. There'll be a single supplement to a price that you can pay to have a single room where available. That option might not be available in all locations. Finally, there's an April 1st deadline to register, and we need a $200 deposit by that time, so that we can make a decision on whether the program will operate or not. So that's quick nuts and bolts, and happy to answer any questions about that. And I know Kimberly had a question as well.
Hey, everybody. So Chris has been working with me on how to try to work with my employer to make a residential a viable option. And so I have kind of a question that I'm not happy to have to ask, but what is our ability to at least stay somewhat connected to email over the trip? I think that my likelihood of being able to do this as part of my job can potentially be more likely if I'm able to work under our policy of remote, which means I have to be able to check in to my email. So I'm prepared to take time off if necessary, but I just hope to be able to answer those questions as they come up from my employer and our HR staff member.
Okay, an excellent question, which the answer would have been quite different even 3 or 4 years ago. The only place where not the days at the agroforestry center, where it's in a fairly remote place. Otherwise, any hotel that wants to cater to modern tourists has to have internet. It just got to. Or they don't mind sleeping in hammocks and so forth as long as there's internet. So Coroico, Rure, Nabaque, it has internet. La Paz, obviously. And it is, if for $5, you can get a Bolivian SIM card, and for very little money, you can have WhatsApp type through your phone connectivity most of the time, even when you're not in the hotel. So that kind of connectivity now is very different from what it was when we had the residentials in Peru, which we had to make time in the day to go to an internet cafe to connect. Here it's going to be, there's Wi-Fi in any the hotels we'd be staying at, except for the 3 days in Santa Ana. If we spend a night in Sadiri, that would be that night there would not be good connectivity. But up until we enter the mountains and leave the mountains next day, there would be phone connectivity, SIM card connectivity, or with a $5 SIM card and some credit. Any other questions? I don't know if there's anybody in the class here which is a West Virginia agroforestry student. Or person that works with agroforestry.
I don't think so. Doesn't look like it.
Okay. Because I would have thought that it would be of particular interest to that group because we've been looking at agroforestry for a lot longer in the tropics than in temperate areas. Um, I almost got hired to the International Center for Tropical Agroforestry 32 years ago in Kenya, Nairobi, Kenya. So we've been looking at this. There's been an international center for that long, and we were looking at it even before that. And we'll be visiting. We'll be spending several days at an agroforestry center.
Thanks, Dan. It looks like a really interesting itinerary and a lot of different items on it. Also, just to address Kimberly's concern, unlike the taught courses that we teach over a span of a semester, so the 3 credits are spread over 16 weeks, 17 including the spring break. These are so much more intensive that although I appreciate you trying to like thread the needle with remote work and how that's going to work, it's going to be a real challenge to stay engaged with a program that's essentially 24/7. That's the way they're designed. We do have some break days, but those are really just to give you enough time to relax and recharge your mind going forward. So I just want to caution anyone trying to do too many things at once. It's not going to be, it's going to feel a lot of pressure. Obviously, so just keep that in mind when you're negotiating with your workplaces on staying connected. It's one thing to
you'll
stay
be in
connected.
contact, but there's not going to be a lot of time.
Sorry, go on, Dan.
Yeah, not there wouldn't be a lot of extra time. There will be a little bit, but not a lot of extra time to write a report or to do something like that. But to be connected, you'll be for consultations and things like that. You'll be remarkably connected compared to residentials even a few years ago.
Yeah, which is an interesting place to be, right? Like there's benefits to being completely remote from the real world, quote unquote, or like my real life, quote unquote. And then there's benefits to being able to kind of have the best of both worlds. So I just wanted to, for the other people on the call, these tend to be quite intensive. And I see some alumni, they will confirm that, and even the design we used to have that the alumni were part of, those took place over even a longer period of time. So these are quite intensive periods. We did have a question, Dan, about the altitude. So if someone who knows that they have issues with altitude, is a lot of the trip going to be at altitude? If they're just aware that La Paz is going to be an issue, dropping down quickly, do you have any other sort of advice on this trip based on altitude concerns?
Well, you'd just be arriving and departing from the altitude. If you know beforehand that you have trouble with altitude, I would say it's a concern because you do have to arrive. There's not really an alternative to arrive, say, in Santa Cruz because the flights from Santa Cruz to Jure, it's possible, but you would be missing about half the trip to come in that way.
Okay.
And and Coroico, where we'll be, is 2,000 meters. That's what I guess a little higher than Denver, not as high as Mexico City.
So even the second location is still Denver height.
Right.
Yes.
I think that the sort of the rule of thumb, at least a few years ago when I was working more on international trips, is that being at altitude for a short period of time, for a couple of hours, even a day, isn't that big a deal. It's typically when you overnight, when you spend the night and you're spending that amount of time at altitude, that that it can be a problem. Also, if you are really exerting yourself at altitude, that's when you can sort of run into problems. But at if you're just arriving, getting on a bus and riding down 8,000 feet or whatever it is, that typically isn't a problem, unless, as Dan says, you know that you have problems at altitude. Then that's something to be aware of.
Yeah.
So if anyone has any other questions that you don't, or if you come up with the questions later, feel free to email me or Dan. Me more about nuts and bolts. Dan, if you've got specific questions about the program. But happy to answer any questions that you have. So we'll wait maybe another minute or so, see if anyone has something to ask. Otherwise, we will go ahead and end this and look forward. Oh, remember that there's that April 1st deadline. We need to get if you're interested, please sign up by then.
Kelly, did you send an email that told us it was due at the end of this month, or did I just completely make that up and am now confused in my brain?
No, that's actually accurate. I think
Oh.
the April 1st date wasn't
Oh, was that my fault? Sorry.
It's an older, yes. Sorry, Chris. I should have made sure we had that right. We do need to know if people are interested by way of paying a $200 deposit by the end of the month. And because if we have minimums, and if we're not getting anywhere near that minimum, then we'll just have to cancel the trip before we put too much more resources into the trip. So if you are on this call and are really 90% there, it would be great if you could pay that $200
Which would be
deposit.
refundable if you didn't go.
Correct. Totally refundable. Totally goes towards any costs that that you would owe the institution as far as credits and that kind of thing. So but that would give us a really good idea of who's very, and that way we can be certain that the trip is running. You can buy plane tickets and all those kinds of planning things. I wouldn't want to cancel a trip in April that's just too close to the actual date. So I will be sending out yet another email saying, please, please, please pay that deposit or get in touch and say that you are, ready to buy those plane tickets and on your way to Bolivia. Any other questions?
I would add, as I look back over what I actually said, those of you that have had courses with me know that I speak in terms of global issues and I use local examples. So it's not like by coming to Bolivia, you're only going to be seeing the Bolivia issue. Bolivia is an example of these broader global issues. So we're going to be constantly drawing back to the broader picture and comparing, particularly in Africa, that where the slash and burn is a major issue every year. The burning, what do we do if we don't burn? So parts of this would be particularly of interest to the people from tropical areas. But these are global issues. I mean, what happens in the Amazon affects people in Tennessee. There's just no getting around that.
Dan, I'm at a agro forestry conference right now in Tennessee.
How long have you been talking about agroforestry in Tennessee?
Not until the data showed that it was a problem, which is like now. Some of us have been sounding the alarm for longer, but until our farmland loss data and our loss of farmers has come up, it really hasn't been picked up by the government until just I'd say within the past year, even though we were sounding the alarm at the grassroots level, probably closer to a decade, if not more ago.
Right.
Okay, well, if there are no other questions, I will go ahead and stop recording, and we'll end this. But again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to shoot me an email.
And me.